Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Mantate Mlotshwa, a young Zimbabwean entrepreneur and program lead for Arts4Change. Enjoy this quality conversation. Mantate Mlotshwa, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You know, when I was looking at your reading around the things that you've done, I couldn't help but think, I would love to have the life that she's having. She's all over the place doing amazing, interesting things. And in a certain way, I get a sense that a foundation is being laid here for an amazing future. Let's start by you describing to the viewers who are watching us right now, how do you describe yourself and the things that you do?
Okay, like I say, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, really. I always say that when it comes to defining Mantate, I am about role modeling phenomenal leadership, particularly in Africa. I think for the longest time as young women growing up, we see a lot of men in spaces that we would love to be a part of, but we're not seeing so many women. So for me, it was always, how do you model, so that other young women can look at you and say, I want to be that. If it's young people, how do you model the kind of leadership where young people are like, oh, wow, I love what she's doing. And they can look at your background and say, she started where we started. So for me, I think the journey has been defining leadership for young people that come from the same place that I come from, and being able to use that to build the kind of Zimbabwe and Africa that we want to see.
Wow, amazing. You turned 25 last year, Mantate, and you celebrated in style. Do you want to share with the viewers how you celebrated your turning 25?
Totally. I was so excited about 25. For some reason, it felt like it wasn't just about me. It was just looking at my background and saying I was raised by a community. Like where I come from, I was raised in Bulawayo in Kolomane. And I always say to Ikas Lami, I was almost the grandchild of every grandparent in that neighborhood. Like people would know me, people would discipline me. They didn't want me to do certain things because they felt like they had a responsibility to raise me. So when I turned 25, I thought to myself, what is the gift that I can give to myself that is an appreciation of those people that fed into who I am? So that's when I started the Water My Roots campaign. So it was about how do I use the resources and networks that I have now in my 25 years of age to feed back into the development of my community. And the biggest challenge in Bulawayo right now has been water for a while. So I was like, how do I, give a practical response to the challenge of water? And the bold idea came up to say, I can tap into the networks that I have. I don't have to just use my savings, but I can actually look at people around me who buy into the Mantate vision and say, how do we do this together? And that's how we started the whole borehole project. And I'm happy that it actually happened, although it was like a few months later.
Did you just build one, or this is a project that's ongoing now?
I think from the kind of response that I got, for me, initially when I started, I wanted to just do one borehole. The idea was to inspire other young people that come from different communities to do a similar project. And then I have a lot of young people in the diaspora and also just in Zimbabwe saying, how do you do that? Because I think for me, that's what I wanted, where I do one and other young people do similar projects and we're able to have more community projects. So I can't say there's a ball coming up soon, but definitely looking at other initiatives that I can put on that help to develop my community.
You got into poultry in 2018. Is that project still going? And if it is, tell us about the state in which it is in.
Yes, in 2018, I started off working at the Women's Institute for Leadership Development in Bulawayo. So one of the things I was thinking about was, how do I get more money outside my salary? I'm one person that's not really satisfied with one thing coming at a certain day in the month. I'm always like, how do I grow the money that I'm getting, to get more and also just to empower people around me? So my aunt already had a poultry area that she once used for a project, but it kind of didn't really work out. So I asked if I could use that space and partner with her to kind of start this poultry project. I remember we started off with 50 chickens in January 2018. And then sometime in July, we then moved to 100. And then in October, I'd moved to Harare to start work and school here. And I managed to raise more funds. So what we did was we destroyed the existing structure and built something bigger, which is exciting for me because I was like, we're advancing. And I remember the December batch we did after that building project was 500 chickens.
Wow.
Which is crazy. This was like in just 1 year. And I was like, okay, girl, this is kind of going well for me. So since then, it's really been going well. We do like cycles of 300 chickens per cycle. And then towards December, we kind of try to double that number. It's going well so far. Yeah.
Interesting. You've also gotten into, I see you're wearing, are you wearing your products there? The earrings and the necklace around your neck? Is that from your company?
Not today, unfortunately. But well, I'll definitely send out a link soon. But in these past days, I've really been wearing the Umukle brand. So the goal is to eventually just wear that brand because I've always been inspired by African-inspired fashion and print. So I was like, let me just do this, but get money out of it while at the same time empowering other women to see themselves as beautiful.
So we're talking about Umutle, which is a sort of word for you are beautiful. Talk to me about the inspiration of starting Umutle.
Yes, so I think for me, I'm very biased to the conception that African women are beautiful. We're not just beautiful in the way that we look, we're beautiful in the resistance with which we live, like the resilience we put, the way we just, push ourselves and the way that we embrace where we come from as the kind of encouragement we need to do great things. So for me, it was a question of how do you empower women to see themselves as strong, resilient, and beautiful, but not just in the way that they feel about themselves, but also create something that when people see Mantate wearing those earrings, they're like umuhle, because the earrings are beautiful, but they're also a beautiful woman. When a woman wears that and they look at themselves in the mirror, they're like umuhle. It's an affirmation of the self. So for me, it was, how do I, extend this love for fashion? Because I think the other crazy thing that kind of always inspires me when I travel for, let's say, programs and all those things, I always wear African print. I did a program sometime in 2019, and I remember it was 2 weeks, and I wore African print throughout, and everyone was asking, so in Africa, you guys wear print all the time? And I was saying, like for me, it's that. Like when I get an opportunity to be in a space where there are not so many Africans, or even they're Africans, I'm just there like, how do I tell my African story? How do I build this, the story of a beautiful, strong, resilient African woman? And fashion is one of the ways in which I do that.
And why the Sesotho name? Explain that to us.
Oh yeah, my dad is Tswana, so my mother is Ndebele, but my father is Motswana. So Umukle is a Setswana Sesotho term. Okay. So for me, it was also kind of like tapping into my roots type thing, where I'm like, my name is Tswana, so I have a Tswana name. So it's always been a thing for me. I really love Sesotho Tswana name. So Umukle comes in to say, it gets people interested, and it just takes it out of Zimbabwe as well to say it's a Southern Africa brand. It's for all of us that can, relate to the term.
What's the state of the business now, and what's your goal going forward with Umutle?
Yes, so we started off in November. That's when I came up with the concept and decided to actually go for it. And then we started working on the designs. So I engaged an artist in South Africa. There's a young person in South Africa that normally does my pencil drawings. He's a very good artist. So I engaged him and said, I have a couple of women that I want to use to kind of launch the brand. So we worked on a couple of designs. So all the 5 women in our initial set of earrings, actually Zimbabwean women that we know, and all of them have a story. Some are cancer survivors, some are, young women that own the African hair, some are business women. So it's different women whose stories I wanted to tell, but in a very interesting way. So then we started off with a collection of 6 designs of earrings, and that's what we're selling now. It's going well so far. The people are really loving them, which is exciting. But beyond just the earrings, we also want to work on how do we explore the African clothing as well. To say we've got the African print, you've got the Nigerian print, the Ethiopian print, the beads in South Africa. So one of the things that we want to do going forward is explore culture. So because Umukle is centered around storytelling, we want to use clothes to also tell that story. And then we're also looking at brand, also image consultancy, where I'm saying there is a Mantate that may have ideas on how a politician in Africa can actually, work on their wardrobe to look feminine, strong African, but still kind of have that powerful politician look. So I'm also hoping that I can use some of the ideas that I have to help other women work on their wardrobes. So we're working on, we're still a baby, but so far the reception has been amazing. And I think I'm encouraged to do more.
Wow, awesome stuff. We wish you the very best with that venture. Let's talk now about where Mantate was born. Where were you born? If you could just take us through that.
So I was born in Bulawayo. So Bulawayo has always been home. I was born in Bulawayo in June 26, 1995, in Kulumane. And that's where I grew up. I think there was a time in my life where if you went to Kulumane and you wanted to go to my house, if you asked someone to go Mantate Kungapi, they would know where it is. And I think that's kind of where I've always been growing up, where, it's not just Ugogo telling you how to behave. When I was so you're in this place, if you behave a certain way, there's people watching you because you're not just mothered by, or you're not just raised by Ugogo. So I grew up in Gulumane. I learned Esgombe Primary School, grade 1 to grade 7, which is an amazing place again. I was very close to home. So one of the craziest things that used to happen is that Ugogo stays right across the school. Like there's a fence and then there's Ama Field and then there's Ugogo's house. So I always joke to say that breakfast was literally just across the fence.
Right,
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's where I grew up. That's where really I established my roots.
And then your secondary school, where did you go?
So first I went to Evelyn High School, which is really exciting because I was a child coming from the ghetto, now transitioning to, an English school, if I can put it that way. And one of the things I loved about Evelyn is that it nurtured my love for writing and reading. That's where really it all developed because there were these big libraries within the school. And I loved reading. So I used to, get into the library, read a lot, borrow books, novels. I was such a huge fan. So my imagination kind of grew in that space. And even with the essay writings, I remember I used to have an English teacher called Mema Figela, was also my debate patron. And she used to push me. There was this one thing she did when we wrote essays. She would double tick every big word or every great expression that you put in the essay. It used to really kind of boost me a lot. So I used to have a lot of that. You find an essay out of 30, you get 28, 29. That was big for me. And that's where I really kind of grew my interest, not just in writing about fiction, but also political issues. I remember in Form 2 at some point, I wrote an essay, a submission into an essay competition that was ideally meant for A-levels. And it's because I had that culture of reading and writing and a teacher that told me I can. So I wrote about women. It was Millennium Development Goals focusing on gender equality. It was crazy. I was in Form 2. I don't think I understood it as much as I do now.
Wow.
But just writing into it and winning a national competition at that level kind of made me realize, okay, sis, you've got something going on. Then I moved to Founders later for my A-level.
Is there a teacher in particular that you remember who contributed to a large extent to the person that you've become at Evelyn or
Yes.
anywhere else?
Totally. There are two particular teachers. The first one at Evelyn, the one I mentioned, Mema Figela. She was my English teacher from Form 1 right up to Form 4. And one of the things I loved about her, she had a library, like her personal office had a library. So she would allow me in anytime. I could go in there during break time, after lunch and all those things and just read. And she would borrow me books and all those things. So I think she really fed into that ability to critically analyze situations and to write about those things. Then when I moved to Founders, I was very passionate about debate and public speaking. And I had a debate patron who's called Mem Masego. I call her my mom, and she's still in touch with me now. We talk. And I think one of the things I love about that woman is that she looked at Mantate as more than just a student. She was a young woman with a passion, but may not have had, the kind of guidance at home that allows her to fit her dreams into spaces that could potentially launch her. So I think it really helped to have a mentor who you could go to and say, hey, there's this competition outside Zim, I don't have money, who do I go to? Or there's this coming up, I need to prepare, how do I handle this? So I think she really fed into who I am.
And in terms of your mother and father, who do you think you take after? I mean, your you are in the arts, you are artistic, you are creative, and so forth. Who is creative and artistic within the family?
So my mom is a creative. I think I take after both of them in a way because I wasn't really raised by my dad. I went to see my dad for the first time in 11 years at age 18. So my dad wasn't there most of the time. But that when I met him, I realized that a lot of my hard work, because I'm a bit of a workaholic. So I think I take off my dad over words. I won't lie.
Yeah.
He's a mechanic by profession. So he's that guy that wakes up very early in the morning and he starts working. He's that guy that sleeps very late every day. So it's something that I take after my dad. And then from my mom is a very creative thing she's very good cooking. So she's a very, very good chef. And she also does, she like recently she bought a sewing machine and she's been doing a lot of things. She's doing bedding. And I think for me, looking at my mom, look at things online, coming up with designs just from seeing online. She didn't go to school to do this and she's producing stuff that she's selling to people. And then the other person that I also think I took after was Ugogo.
Uh-huh.
I always joke to say my gogo is everything. She's a landscaper. She's just a lot of things. So just seeing gogo be creative around her house. She will tell you today I want to extend my kitchen. I will not call in anyone. I just want it done this way. Calls the builder and she does that. So I think the creativity is something that comes with the family, but the nature in which it manifests kind of changes with who's involved.
A lot of us were raised by Ogogo at some point. You sound like you've got a very intimate relationship with the Gogo. Can you just walk through with us in terms of your memories and the relationship that you have with the Gogo?
Ugogo, one of the things that really makes me, she's the love of my life. Ugogo, one thing she did was when she was raising me, she saw that I was opinionated. There are certain things that I wouldn't do just because they're done. I would question things. So I was always that child. So you find that in some households, as a young girl, as a child, you can't question, authority. You can't tell people how you prefer things done. So growing up in an environment where Ugogo allows you to be yourself. I remember she used to joke because I was very talkative, loved doing speeches. She used to say, "Ukuthi ungumZulu kaMgabe," at that when I was growing up. That's what she used to say. So why she said that was because the president at the time, before I knew him, at a very critical level, it was just looking at a man who was very articulate. He would know what to say and how to say it, and you'd see people actually affirming that. So I think for Gogo, just looking at me, she was always thinking, oh, okay, there's a little bit of, this in you. So it was one thing that really made me feel like I could step out and voice myself because Ugogo affirmed that. So that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. Even later when I was kind of then discovering the true nature of our leaders and some of the things we wanted to take away from them and some of the things we didn't want to take away from them. She wasn't the person to remind you, but you always thought this man was everything. She's that woman who's, always been open to your growth and you finding your different voices. So yeah, I loved her for that. And the craziest things as well was that I grew up with a lot of cousins around me. I remember at some point in Gogo's forum house, we'd find 9, 10, 11. It was so crazy. But it's one of those things where I looked at Gogo with 8 children and so many grandkids. And I'm looking at a woman that's raising these kids alone, So it's always been that inspiration to say, when I grow up, I want to be as strong as her, but in a different way because she comes from a generation where a woman could not exactly be a lot of things. But now I'm just like, I come with the strength of a woman that raised kids on her own, grandkids of her own, and inspired people like me to be what we are today. So there's so much I take away from her, so much I want to be, but also so much I want to change about where she comes from to say, I'm going to be a different young woman. There are things I will not take, the things that I'm going to become that society at the time you grew up said you cannot be.
Wow. She must be proud of you.
She is. She tells me all the time.
That's beautiful. So tell me, Evelyn and then founders, and what next? What did you do next?
Yeah, so I finished school in 2015. And there are certain things I knew, like we didn't have money for university, so that wasn't really an option. And there were a couple of other complications. I remember that my mom worked as a domestic worker in South Africa for the longest time. Like my entire schooling, my mom was a domestic worker. And my dad was not in the picture financially. So when I finished my A level in December, I went to Botswana to stay with my dad a bit. And I remember that when I got to Botswana, I started working at this community restaurant. It was like a community development project. So the restaurant that they were running, and I was working there as the chief waitress. The only challenge was the language. Tswana is difficult. I went like it's one of those most the most difficult languages I had to deal with, and it was a traditional cuisine that made it even worse because here you can say maguru, amatumbu, and that's it. That side, there were those dishes I didn't have an idea of, but I was chief waitress and kind of needed to figure it out. So I stayed in Botswana for 3 months, and I realized that maybe that wasn't my space. I felt like I was in one place. So I came back home in April, and then when I left Zim, I'd gone for interviews for the Zimbabwe Greatest Talent Show, which was looking for presenters across Zim. So when I went to Botswana, I really thought I didn't qualify because when I went to the interviews, they were really amazing women, and I thought I didn't have what it took. So I left and went to Botswana, didn't bother following up. But when I came back to Zim, I got a call from these guys, and they're like, we've been trying your number, and we couldn't get in touch with you, and you actually made it. So that's one of the first things I started doing in May 2016. And then around the same time as well, I joined the Youth for Christ Zimbabwe as a volunteer into a program that they were starting that was called Keta Creative Arts. So Keta is an Ndebele word that means choose. So the concept behind the group was, how do we inspire young people in schools, in churches, and in communities to choose life? It was a Christian organization, not just choosing life, but choosing the kind of behaviors that allow them a sustainable future. So that's one thing I did from May 2016 right up to August the same year when I joined Transparency International Zimbabwe as well as a volunteer. So you discover that from that time when I started those voluntary work, it really grew. I was with Transparency International for a while, but there were other people that were calling me in to say, we see what you're doing as a young person. There are projects I was running personally. Like I used to do projects without money, and I don't know why I had that audacity, because I remember there was a time when I planned Youth Engage with training for young people, and I didn't have a venue confirmed that I had a planned event. I had no venue, I had no refreshments, I didn't have money to pay speakers, so I wasn't planning to get people that needed to be paid. But one of the things that I really capitalized on was the networks I had. So I would go to an organization like Transparency International and say, I'm building young people, to be socially responsible young people that defend human rights and all those things, which is what they do as an organization. So I would say, I will mobilize the young people, I will train those young people, but can you provide a venue, maybe speakers, and maybe, so that's how I did a lot of my projects without money. I would leave home without money, but come back with a report that says I had 50 young people. So that's kind of what I was doing throughout 2016 and most of 2017. But I want to highlight two things that happened in 2017 that kind of then helped me launch into a professional career. When was that? It was, I think, March 2017. I applied for a program called Generation Democracy, which is run by the International Republican Institute. So it was a conference in South Africa. And for some reason, I qualified in, and I was one of the 34 young people that met in South Africa. And one of the things I loved is that when I got there, that's when I met the likes of Maureen Kademaunga, Tabile Dewa, Ashton Bumira, like different people from Zim that I didn't know, because I was from Bulawayo and I didn't really know a lot of people from this side of the country. So when we got there, you're seeing there's amazing people that are running organizations, some are project officers and all those crazy things. And it felt like I was in the right space to learn because I wasn't really, solid at that time. And one of the things that stood out in that conference is that we did a presentation of the state of young people in your countries. And so what normally happens in these conferences is that the older ones want the younger ones to do the work, Right. So people are like, no, the younger ones work on it. And then you present, Tina will just see if it's okay. So us, it's like an opportunity to, take it all out. So I remember myself and a friend called Nalenhle Moyo, we did a presentation that was more graphic, because in these presentations, people normally do this PowerPoints where you project and talk about Zim problems and all those things. So we decided to be a little bit more creative. We took a Zim flag, and then we took a bin bag, So it was a white beanbag that we got from one of the rooms. And then what we did was we opened like holes that we'd use as an eye in that beanbag. And then we wrote all over the sheet, we wrote the different problems that we were facing as young people in Zimbabwe. And then I pulled that over Nalenhle. So she had this thing over her, but she could see. And then we put the Zim flag around her. So she sat on the stage, and throughout the presentation, I was giving a picture of young people that know where they want to be, you know, where they would rather be. But there's so much around them that kind of keeps them in this one place. And then at the end, just highlighting some of the initiatives young people are doing to kind of step away from that. So at the end, with a Zim flag around this young person without the beanbag around her. So it was such a graphic representation of what we stand for. And they loved it. I won't lie. I think from that time, IRI really kind of followed my work. When I got back home, they would always retweet my work. When I was doing something, the Africa account on Twitter would retweet and all those crazy things. And fast forward 2018 September, I joined IRI as a formal employee, which is crazy because it started in September, in sometime in 2017 in South Africa. Then at some point you're working for the institution, you're contributing to program design for your country. So I think, yeah, the journey has been Mantate volunteering a lot, you know, doing a lot of activities without money and just trying to make it work until we got here.
That's fascinating there. You raise your hand, you put yourself in spaces, you volunteer, you get noticed, you make an improvement in your life. What lessons has that taught you, Mantate?
Like one of the key lessons that I share with a lot of young people is that you don't have to be the best in an industry to thrive. It's about what you put in. There's so many young people that are potentially better than me in terms of the way that I speak, in terms of the way that I write, and all those things that I'm doing. But the difference between them and potentially Mantate is I put in the work. Like that's one thing I make sure I don't like sleeping. I don't know why, but I'm always there. Like now that my work is done at 5, how do I push Umukle? You know, how do I write a blog article? How do I contribute to that book that has to be published in a few weeks? So I think the lesson I've learned is people will notice you, but only if you're seen doing something. So that's what I've been doing my whole life. Where even at Magamba, where I work now, I'm just like, I'm doing my job, but you're not just doing your job. You're also building a profile that someone outside Magamba can look at and say, we want to work with Magamba. We want to work with Mantates. So I think, yeah, that's the biggest lesson I've learned. And then the other thing I learned based on where I come from, because sometimes we look at our backgrounds and say, okay, I come from the hood where you're raised by a gogo, she doesn't have money, so there's no university coming up and all those crazy things that we tell ourselves. The lesson I've learned is that when you want something, you need to figure out how you get that something. Then when you figure it out, you need to put in the work, and things don't always work out the way we think they will. But when you push, because right now I'm in my final year at university, I'm doing my first degree in psychology at the University of Zimbabwe. And it's crazy because you meet people and they ask, oh, which masters are you doing or which masters did you do? I'm like, I'm not there yet. But with the kind of work that I've been doing, you build yourself to a level where people expect you to be at their level or even higher. And that's what hard work does.
When do you graduate from your the psychology degree? When do you graduate?
Should be August this year because I'm writing my exams for the second final semester, and then I should be jumping into my final semester end of March. Okay. So I'm very excited. I mean, I can't wait to finish. School is amazing, but
it's a lot of work. I'm just wondering, as you talking and I'm listening, you being raised by Ugogo, Dad is away. You eventually meet Dad at 18. And you are you raised by mom. Tell me what effect that has had in terms of the person that you've become.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I'll mention is that in a way you are forced to be, like the men in your life. Because when you grow up, I grew up in a very feminine space where what I knew was Ugogo. And just being able to see her do all those things she was doing. And so I didn't really have a father figure growing up. So Ugogo was my example of what fathers should do. The whole idea of protecting your kids, the whole idea of providing for your kids and all those things. So I think naturally I didn't have a problem because my grandmother did what my father could have been there doing. But I think the biggest challenge for me growing up without my dad was the idea that I had a Tswana name. So already when you meet people, they ask you like, "Oh, you're Tswana." When they ask you so much more about your roots, and there was nothing to tell really, because I'm like, I haven't been there. The first time I went to Botswana to see my dad was when I was in grade 1 in 2003, and that was the last time I saw him. Then I went to see him again when I found him again, like located him again when I was 18. So you kind of learn how to figure it out. So when I reunited with him, the one thing I'm really grateful for is that when I met my dad, I wasn't angry at this man. It was so much excitement to finally see him. And I remember the first day when I was in Botswana, whenever I would walk around in the hood with my young sisters and my brothers, people would say Ngwana wa Fred. Like people see, like they would just see me and see my dad. We look alike. So it was one of those things where it made me appreciate the fact that even though I wasn't in the picture, he spoke about me. You know, I don't know what reason was there between my parents that made them, you know, kind of not let me know where my dad was. But just being able to see that this man was out here talking about me, and my young sisters, all of them knew I existed. So it was really nice to come back and say, oh, okay, how do we build from here? But I can't say that having a father or not having a father kind of, you know, made me less of what I wanted to be. I had a father figure at home, was in the form of my grandmother, so I was kind of fine.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So, if some people walk around angry, unforgiving, you know, I didn't have a father and so forth, and they carry that around as an obstacle in a way to their lives. But for you, that's not been the case.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And then you went to Yale, the campaign school. Talk to me about that.
Oh, that was one of the most transforming moments of my
Uh-huh.
life. Yeah, so in 2019, I told you that I joined International Republican Institute in 2018. So what happens is that the institution has they have resources that they set aside for professional development. So there was this program in the US that was for people that have an interest in political campaign management. And one of the Africa director at the time, he knew me from that 2017 incident in South Africa, and he
Wow.
had been watching me grow. So he seconded me to apply for that program. So the institution seconds a number of people across the regions, and then we apply. If you're admitted into the school, you then get funding from the institution to go and participate in the program. So I went, and I remember when I got there the first day, I was the only African among the 80 women. And I won't lie, it felt amazing to see that it wasn't just about Mantate being at Yale University doing this program. It was everyone, that comes from where I come from. So it felt like, it's for the hood, it's for the city, it's for the country, it's for the continent. So we did that program, and I think I would want to mention that in the first day, I remember I struggled a bit because you're in the space where there are these phenomenal women. You know, when they tell you about, I was in Hillary Clinton's campaign, I worked for Obama, I'm just like, okay, sis, what am I? It's just one of those things where I almost felt for a moment that I wasn't as big as those women were. But one of the things I reminded myself, thankfully early in the program, was that I was there for a reason. The reason why I was among those women was because there was a greatness in me that I needed to acknowledge at that time. And there was a Mantate, an African woman with an interest in politics and development in a country and the continent that I needed to share. So throughout the program, I remember there was a time when I rose to speak, you needed to talk about what you wanted to be in the next 20 years and something like that. So I stood up for the first time to talk, and everyone was shocked. They're like, okay, girl, so why have you been sitting on yourself? So it allowed me to step out and share Zimbabwe. Even when I came back, a lot of the women I met, they are still my friends. A lot of them watch my work. Some of them, look at me and say, hey, sis, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to be a part of? What is it that you're doing home that I can feed into? So it really changed the way I look at myself, first as an African, among other people outside Africa, but also it changed the way I look at myself as a woman in politics, because to be honest with you, those women are trailblazers. So when I look at them every day, I'm seeing them run for, the Senate, Parliament, doing different things. I'm like, I'm inspired. I want to build more women in my country, in my continent, that have that kind of, confidence in themselves, because I think if we have more of those women, we can do more.
And then you talk to me about the Yali alumni. You are Yali alumni.
Yes.
The what's been the experience like, and what's been the journey like?
It's been amazing because I went to Yali in 2018. It was the civic leadership track in 2018, and I remember that I met a lot of young people. I think for me, one of the things that's been high on my growth is the networking. So you get into the space where there's young people from different countries and they are doing different initiatives, some in media, some in politics, some in business, and all those crazy spaces. And it's always about how do I network with those young people, because when I get back home, I need to be able to use them in the programming that I'm doing. So when I went into Yali, I really was high on collaborating and networking with other young people. But one of the things I did at Yali was, at the end of the 4 weeks that you spend at the Yali school, you then have to come up with a project as a group that you need to do. So if you have the civic leadership track, you need to come up with a civic initiative. So I came up with this idea of a sanitary pad drive, and I worked with other people. And I remember that in the space of a few days, we managed to raise 6 months supply of sanitary pads for 40 young people, like for 40 young girls in an orphanage in South Africa. So for me, it's always been the lesson of the power of collaboration and networking. So when I came back home, I continued to collaborate with those young people. And one of the things that Yali has come back to do for me over the years is that they've called me back to speak to their young people. Recently, they launched an online cohort with over 400 young people, and I was called in as a guest speaker. So I was coming in to share my experience at Yali and how it shapes Mantate as I go forward from Yali. And I think that's been the most amazing thing, because you get young people from Zim and outside sending you messages on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and saying, we love your story. It made us kind of feel excited about the whole Yali experience that is coming up. So I think Yali is a space where you can grow. But like I said earlier, that it doesn't make you grow, you make it work for you. So I've always been tapping into that space and being able to say, how do I, tap into someone in Nigeria or in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, whatever, and see how we can do a podcast together or a webinar together. So yeah, I think that's been Yali for me.
And tell me, did you go looking for it? Did you apply for it, or it came looking for you? That Yali opportunity.
So I always say that I like things in a good way. So yeah, I do. I put myself where I feel I'm positioned to find myself. So I applied for the Yali program, and lucky enough, I made it. I think one of the things that made me qualify into the program is that Yali transitioned from just looking at young people that knew how to write, because sometimes in those programs, there's people that know how to write English, but they're not doing anything at home. So Yali moved into a more practical application process where they wanted you to share what you're practically doing and some of the results that you have. So at that time, I was really doing a lot in my community. And that's how I qualified into the program. Yeah. And then other ones, of course, someone recommends, but I like things. So when I see something that fits into who I'm trying to become, I throw in an application, even if I feel like I don't qualify. We'll see. Coco.
Fascinating, very inspirational journey, Mantate. You say that you are passionate about the role of women and youth in democracy. Tell me, where does this passion come from?
For women, it's that thing I mentioned earlier, where you're raised by a single, woman, ugogo, who grew up in a community where you're looking at her. She didn't finish primary school, number one. She never worked her entire life. And she had a husband who was in the military, an amazing man. But then you discover that he wasn't the man you would want even your husband to be.
Oh, wow.
So in all of those things, you're looking at a woman at home and saying, I want to be different. I want to give her a different experience. So I need to push myself, and also in the community as well. I was looking at young girls. There are girls my age that are mothers of 2-3 kids right now. There are girls that were younger than me that would, be pregnant before they finish school. It used to really mess me up a lot, because I'm like, they think it's cool when they're doing it at the time, but it's their whole future put on hold because of something that they could have avoided. So it's always been a heart to say, how do I build women, to be leaders? And the reason why politics is such a big thing for me is because almost all the decisions that affect the way that women blossom in our communities come from politics. It's parliamentarians that make policies. It's women talking about access to menstrual health resources. It's about education of girls, child marriage, and all those crazy things. It goes back to the lawmaking process. How do we prioritize women in the way we budget? So I was like, how about we build the agents of women? How about we build the capacity of young women to also be involved in politics as policymakers? So that's been the inspiration. And then for young people, there's this argument that young people are a majority, not just in Zimbabwe, but in Africa and potentially in the world. And for me, it's amazing to know I fit into the women demographic and the young people demographic. But one of the things I always understand is that I'm not young forever. So the reason why I press so hard right now is because there's so many young people that need to be built to lead, because our future when we're no longer young is going to be determined by what we put in while we're still young. And even the way that we lead as young people, it then motivates the younger ones, to see themselves and say, I want to lead as well, because I think a better Zim benefits all of us. So that's what I'm trying to do, build the agency and capacity of women and youth to be a part of the processes that change.
Wow. And you're 25 years old. I mean, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. And what's amazing also, what impressed me, Mantate, is your motto. And your motto is, I want to be remembered as a woman who taught by being. That's powerful.
Thank you.
Unpack that for us.
So, you remember when I introduced myself, one of the things that I mentioned was I define myself as a role model of phenomenal leadership, not just in Zim, but in Africa. It started off when I was nothing really, so it was crazy to say phenomenal leadership, which one, right? But you find that this is the bigger picture. I want people to look at me and see possibility. So the reason why I'm very inspired by Maya Angelou's statement that I want to be remembered as an intelligent woman, a courageous woman, a strong woman, a woman that teaches by bang. It comes from a place where I'm like, it's easy to tell someone to stay in school because education will launch you. It's easy to tell someone to say, don't sleep, write a book, write a blog, because it will help you. It's easy to tell people. But when they're seeing you do that and become something, I think it's kind of easier for them to want to do that too. So I want to be high on that side of life where I teach people by being exemplary in doing that, to say, okay, this is what you can do to better your life. So I think it's also kind of the one thing that shapes even my projects. There's one project I want to mention, it's Women's Month as well, but there's a project I did in 2019 called Lead Girls to School. So the theme around that year for the International Day of the Girl Child was empowering women, empowering girls for a better future. So for me, it was this whole thing of, I grew up in a community that said education is the key to success. And Zim wasn't exactly the example of a country where when you get educated, you get a job and you're successful. So it was one of those things where I felt like going into communities and telling people that have no money, to send their kids to school, that they need to keep their kids to school because education is important. I felt like, how do I tap into my networks and raise money to practically pay school fees for girls? When I do that, I am giving them that one thing that gives them a reason to stay in school, and not just pay school fees as well, but find ways of mentoring those young people. So in doing that, I felt like I was giving an example to other people that are doing the work that I do, that it's not enough to tell people what they need to, progress in life. How about we take advantage of the resources that we have and the networks we have to practically respond to some of those challenges that people are facing? So I think that's what I'm trying to do, to be.
And but how many kids were you able to help? Do you remember? Is the project still ongoing?
Yeah, so when we started off, the target was 12 young girls in rural communities. But one of the most amazing things happened is that we raised more funds. So we ended up supporting 35 young people.
Wow.
What happened was we started paying off to pay for their school fees. We wanted to pay for the entire 2020. So we advanced their fees at the beginning of the year. But COVID happened, unfortunately. And it kind of changed a lot of things. So one of the things I'm trying to do now, because I want this to be a continuous thing, the goal is to have sent at least 100 girls to school by 30. So what I'm trying to do now is to get in touch with the contacts in the schools and the parents as well, to say how did they perform, because I know the pass rate wasn't really awesome this year. To say how did these young girls perform? If they didn't do so well, how do we make sure that they go back to school? And in this post-COVID environment, find ways of still making it through that primary school, then they can go into secondary school.
Another fantastic project in keeping with your motto of I want to be remembered as a woman who taught by doing. And another project is Arts4Change. Talk to me about Arts4Change.
You see how it makes me smile.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's my current professional engagement. So I'm working at Magamba Network as the program lead for a program called Arts4Change. So it was launched last year, and it's part of a bigger project called the New Narratives for Accountability in Zimbabwe that's being implemented by Accountability Lab, Kubatana Trust, and Magamba Network. So the premise of Arts4Change is, where do we bring in the artists to contribute to issues of social justice and accountability, not just in making them, building them to raise awareness around those issues, but also in kind of using music and film to hold leaders to account. So the idea is to just bring in those unconventional voices, because I think Zim has a lot of artists, and a lot of them don't have resources to build their art. Some of them are socially conscious, but it's very difficult to break through if you're a socially conscious artist, because there are certain things, there are certain places you can't perform, there are certain things you're willing to say that put you on the spotlight. So when I joined the program, the reason why, that's when I left IRI, which is like my parent. Like, I really loved IRI, but I joined Magamba because this program spoke into my heart for building the capacity of young people. We were saying we're bringing together, through the Voice to Rap competition, 10 young musicians from across Zim that want to, grow their art. So one of the things that really inspired me was the practicality in the program. So I wanted, definitely to talk about Voice to Rap, because we worked on an album on a 2020 album called Freedom. So you find that these 10 young people coming from different places then came together, and they went through like a very massive training where they're taught about social justice. You've been singing about social issues, but really, what are the social issues? What's their implication on everyday lives of young people, of women, of whoever in your community? And then when they put together this album, it was each of them telling the experiences of their community. There's a young person in the Freedom album that sang a song called "Can You Hear Me Now." So the song talks about gender-based violence, and for me, it's this idea that a society will see a woman abused and cover up for the abuser. So it talks about a young woman that's going through the most and opening up to her parents, and the mother kind of doesn't listen to her. So you find that these are real issues in the community, but it's music that entertains. And there are other songs in the album that talk about the state of things in Zimbabwe, where someone tells you, "Kuti Korerino, it pushed us back." And that's just the true reality of our everyday lives. So I think through Arts4Change, through Voice to Rap, I'm being, able to have more young people as part of the bigger conversation on social justice. And there's another wing of Arts4Change called Film Fellowship, because more than just the music, it's about how do we begin to document experiences in communities. So we work with 10 filmmakers every year, where we're saying, how do we help you develop your filming skills? How do you use your phone to document human rights issues in your community? How do you use your phone to develop a documentary around the issue of access to quality and affordable water in your community? Then we help these young people to edit in a professional studio. We also pair them up with great mentors that help them to refine their art. So when they get out of the program a year later, they've got 10 films that have been launched that we are promoting with our resources. But it's not just that, it's being able to see those young people outside our program becoming something, because someone will see your film and say, "Hey, can we work with you?" So I think it's been really great, because it's the creative arts, which is really something I'm very passionate about, but it's also within that democracy and governance space, which is also something that sits at the core of my heart.
I can see the passion as you're talking. It's oozing out of you. You're absolutely enjoying this. How long have you held this job for?
8 months.
8 months, and you're thoroughly enjoying it.
I love it.
And the other project which stands out for me is you being a co-producer and host for the Resistance Peru. Talk to me about that.
Yes. So the craziest thing is I started the Resistance Bureau the
You
same month
realize
that
that
I
you do
started.
you realize that you do lots of crazy stuff, eh?
Yes, I mean, my entire life, there's a statement that we always share that says, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams." That's
Wow.
that's what I am. Like, when I think crazy, I do, because at the end of the day, no one will judge your, decisions when the results are really great. So in July 2020, I was approached by a colleague and friend of mine, Nick Chisman from Birmingham University. I think you know Nick Chisman.
Yes.
And you say there's a project that we're putting together, and because of the kind of work that you're doing and your passion around issues of human rights and democracy, would love for you to be part of the core team. So when I heard that, I didn't even think twice. Like, I was like, yes, I'm in. I think that I say that I like things, so I just jumped in.
Yeah.
And I remember that it was just this idea of jumping in and using my voice, because you're hosting, you're bringing together people and you're just asking questions around issues that you're passionate about. But then we've got a very strong team. Like, our core team is a very, very solid team. And one of the things I've learned throughout this process, because I think when I came in, there was that thing of, these are professors, these are directors of organizations, and you're going to be interviewing, Bobby Wine, big people, Tundu Lisu, the big names across Africa and across the world. And sometimes I think you kind of think, because I don't know so much, maybe I may not be as great. But the fact that someone came and said, we want you on it, for me, it was like, I'm going to put in the work. So I think one of the takeaways I've got from just, sitting in the same place with amazing people that are fighting for democracy, that are putting their lives on the line, for an Africa that is, just and fair. I think one of the things I've learned is that what I'm doing is worth it, because you get, I manage the WhatsApp account for the team, and you get messages from people in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in different countries, and they're telling you that I was beaten up yesterday. Someone says, this happened to me. When you see these things and someone saying, thank you so much for spotlighting this, because without people spotlighting it, it's almost like we suffer on our own. So building that solidarity, for me, providing people a place where they come in and ask critical questions, it's been amazing. I've learned so much more about Africa than I think I would have reading or listening to BBC or Al Jazeera. So I think it's been a great space, and I've really, really grown, even in the way that I analyze issues. It's no longer just this whole Zim lives matter, people are dying in the streets, all those things. No, it's being able to link everything to what kind of leadership do we have, what kind of systems of, the judiciary do we have, what kind of civil society organizations do we have. So I think in more ways than one, it's building me into everything that I want to be.
But as you're talking, I've noticed a certain trend. You get into spaces, and I want you to unpack this for us. You get into spaces, you doubt yourself. You have the conversation about doubting yourself. Am I good enough? You did that at Yale. You get approached. Do I have the right education? But you still step out. Talk to me about how you deal with this ghost called doubt, doubting yourself.
Um, yeah, like I don't think, I wouldn't call it doubt per se. I think it's a very good practice in a way. Getting into a space and understanding that I'm good, but I can never be more than good enough for a space. So if it's a new space, I think I'm always there, like, I've never done this before. So how exactly do I do this? So it's that question of capacity to say, I'm in this space for a reason. The reason why people wanted me here, the reasons why I was admitted into a program, is because I have what it takes. But I think there's always that moment. It's like, even before interviews like this, where I'm like, I know we're talking about my story, but there's always that moment, where you're like, okay, how's this gonna go? So I think
Yeah.
it's something that I'm learning to value, because it pushes me all the time to say, how do I build this Mantate that I feel could be more for this particular space? So I think it's something that comes in as a nudge to do better. And even when I step out, because I think we've done about 10 shows with the Resistance Bureau. And every time I get into a show, I can tell you the nerves are wrecking me. It's like I haven't done this before, but it's understanding what's at stake because of the work that we do. This is not matope, as I would want to put it. Yeah.
They say that nerves are a good thing. I was just, as we're getting on to preparing this, my wife helps me prepare the set. And I was saying to my wife, say, the nerves are something else. So they say nerves are a good thing, and the moment you don't have the butterflies in your stomach, then you know that something wrong has happened. Is that your sense?
It is. It definitely. I think it also kind of comes into say the level of preparation you put before you jump into something. It comes from that because when you feel like you're geared, because I mean, I talk about this a lot every day. I'm sharing my story. But I think when you tell yourself you already know it, like you're just ready for it, you don't prepare enough.
Mm.
So I think it's good to have those naps because the reminder that, hey, you know you need to know what you're going to say, but you also need to grow how you articulate your story. So nerves are important, but they're also very stressful.
The last project that I want us to focus on is the good news is, which is around COVID and spreading positive messages around people's experiences. How can you identify positive experiences in a difficult space as this? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think I started this in March 2020 when we went on lockdown. So what happened with COVID is that at that time we didn't have a lot of accurate information. There was so much, flying all over. We're
Mm.
just reading about people dying. We're just reading a lot of things negative. And when you look at Zim as well, you're reading about the state of our health systems. I think at that moment it felt like, yo, guys, we are done. I can tell you, it felt like the last days or something like that. But I think for me, I am one person who always looks at hope in all situations because I always feel that in every scenario, there is someone that's fighting to make sure things don't get worse. There's a law, there's a scientific law called the Memphis law, and it talks about how when things are left as they have a tendency to get worse. So for me, it came from that place where I'm like, for things to either, be stopped from getting worse and potentially turn around into getting better, there's people that are doing something. So the good news was really about, I'm seeing a lot of young people across Zimbabwe, across Africa, that are helping feed the poor on the streets because when lockdown, suddenly there's nothing that they're finding in those bins that they normally find food at. You also look at people that are helping women with shelter who are experiencing gender-based violence because now they're spending more time with perpetrators and all these people that are doing something. So I was like, I want a show that reflects the work of these people. When I spotlight those people, it's not just about celebrating them, but it's also inspiring other people in different places to start doing something. Because if you look at the feedback that I got from the show, there were more young people that were saying, hey, I have some money. Can we contribute? Hey, we're doing this. Can we partner these people? So I think for me, it was that excitement to know that we're not just celebrating people, but we're also offering other young people that potentially have nothing to do but have networks and resources to also say, oh, okay, they're making face masks from clothes. I have clothes at home that I can use to make face masks. How do I do that? So I think that's what inspired the good news is.
You're so full of energy, and you get yourself into spaces and you do amazing things. Have you had moments where you felt defeated? Have you had moments where you felt it's not worth it? Have you had moments when you felt I ought to give up and just lie down?
I think, yeah, a couple. There's one that I'll only talk about when I write my book finally, but there's one incident in my life, yeah. But then I'll share about it when I finally write a book about my life. But I think for me, the biggest challenge has always been, especially before 2018. I told you I started formal employment January 2018. I think before that, I was involved in a lot of things. And because you're traveling to those countries, you're involved in those, works of organizations, everyone assumes you've got money, you know. People thought I had money and I was broke. So it's one of those things where there was so much I needed to do. I wanted to go to school and I wanted to take care of Fugogo, the things I wanted to do that I knew would better my life, but I didn't have enough resources to do that. And I think it's one of those things where you coming from a background where you can't bail. If you can't bail yourself out, no one will do that for you. So I think it was that frustration at that time to look at my friends who are at university, who are living their best life really, and just looking at yourself and thinking, where am I in this life? But one of the things that kept me going was understanding that there was so much growth in my life since high school. and everything was aligning me for a purpose. So I knew at some point I'll end up in a university doing a degree that I love and graduating and progressing in my studies. So I think that's one of the things that really stands out as a moment of, questioning. But also in the work that we do, there are moments of frustration and tears.
Let's talk about that. Those moments of frustrations. What are those? What would about
Zim. Zim is a lot of
Let's talk
things.
about that.
Like, first of all, the one thing that remains a nightmare for a lot of women is the issue of sexual abuse. Like sexual abuse that is a lot to do with politics, in Zimbabwe over the years. I remember in January 2019, there was that report of women that were raped by men in military uniforms during that that incident that we have where people are beaten and all those things. So that's one thing that really kind of hit me really hard. And it extends even to the issue last year of the 3 young women from the MDC Alliance that came back and we're talking about an experience being sexually violated. And it's not just that. In Bulawayo, you also read about young girls that are sexually violated just to prove a point to their father who was involved in politics. So the reason why it's such a frustration or a point of, of anger for me is because I'm like, I'm a woman. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't happen to me. So it's understanding that every day as a woman fighting for democracy in this country, in the continent, you're putting yourself on the line because anyone can decide to just come in and, just prove a point that we can do something that can silence you. So that's one thing that really sits so strong. And also for those women, I remember I did a follow-up with a friend last year just to ask how they are, because I know for sure nothing was done about those cases of January 29. And I was talking to this lady and she's talking about how there's 2 women that she mentioned. And one of them, she says that she has an STI that she can't get treated for. And she doesn't even have the resources, to go to hospital. And the other one was talking about how she was pregnant and the baby, she lost the baby before her full term. So it's these 2 women who can never have a life that, where you can be free and not think about what happens to you. So it's understanding that every day and realizing that we're living in a country that almost fights us every day for simply existing as women. So it messes me up clearly. So I think it's, in as much as it makes me angry, makes me cry a lot, it also comes back to say it validates what I do every day. It might not be changing all the women in the country, but it's inspiring people every day to keep fighting because someone can't fight for themselves. And we have the privilege of the spaces and the platforms to speak for those people, to spotlight their experiences, and also just to demand a Zimbabwe that respects them, that gives them dignity, because I think we all deserve it in our different capacities. Yeah.
You're being very emotional right now. Do you think you're making progress?
In the work that I'm doing, definitely. Definitely. I think, like I was mentioning, that for me, it's issues of connecting people, collaborations and networks. So especially during lockdown, where you're realizing that there's a lot of women that will come in and say, do you know a place where there's a shelter for women that are abused? I remember sometime in 2019 in Hartfield, I'd gone to Hartfield for a program that we're doing on constitutional awareness. And I met this woman and she was talking to me about how this child, she was 11 at the time, had been raped by a father, and the mother paid bail for this man to get out of prison. The mother of the child paid bail for her husband to get out of prison. So she was just asking, how do we support this girl, not just to get counseling, but to also go back to school, those kind of things. So I think I'm making progress in my small way by always finding ways to connect those women with people that I know can offer assistance. But not just that, it's also spotlighting those issues. For me, my biggest strength is my ability to speak and my ability to write. So if I'm not speaking about it, I'm writing about it. I have a blog called Radites, where I write what I call fiction, but it's a reflection of experiences of real life people. So just being able to write about the abuse of women, I think it's such a big issue for me. It helps people to start talking. There's a book that we published recently, and my story is really centered around the sexual abuse of women in marriages, in politics, and in universities. It talked about women in politics. So I think I'm just using my talent, you know, to highlight those experiences because it gets women talking. Someone will send you a message and say, I went through this and I haven't dealt with it. Or they'll come in and say, this is how I kind of took myself away from this. So I think for me, it's always been just seeing women win, you know, and be able to share their stories. When you share their stories, you encourage more women to get out, I guess. So I think that's what I'm trying to do for now. Then later, when I have more capacity, you know, and networks, I think I could do more.
What could that more be? Point number one. Point number two, you stood up at Yale and you spoke about what you want to do, what you want to become in the next 10 to 20 years. What is Mantate Mlotshwa going to be in the next 5 to 10 years?
I am the future. Yeah. So I think the first thing is growing up, like I said, that whole, you know, at the time, there was a Robert Mugabe energy in you. Then when you grow, you then discover that the man is a lot of things that you pray to God you never become, right? But the heart's always been that. Like, I want to be able to influence governance in Zimbabwe, in Africa. So I'm not just looking at governance at the level of Zim, we're looking at the African Union. For the longest time, I'm always saying there's so much that that body can do, but it's not doing that. You look at the United Nations as well to say, how do we build ourselves to ensure that we're in these spaces? Because when we're in these spaces of influence, it means that we're able, you know, to do more for our countries. Because I think what we don't have, unfortunately, in our time is leadership, not just in Zim, but continent, the world, people that are not selfish. The universe is big enough for all of us to flourish. You know, we may not all be billionaires, but I think there is room for everyone to have the most basic in life. So I think what I'm seeing of myself in the next 20, 25 years, outside us saying Professor Mlotshwa at the time, or Dr. Mlotshwa at the time, I'm just looking at a woman who's potentially influencing policy at the level of governance in Zim, but we're also looking at a woman that's influencing even the AU, the UN, institutions like that. I think that's where the heart is. And the reason why right now, I'm not even in politics and all those things, because ideally people would ask you, are you in politics? Because that's kind of where this would go. But I think I want to build Mantate, you know, but building Mantate means building people, because what we need is not a Mantate that will be different, because one person can't change an entire system. But what we need is to build the agency of women, of young people, of everyone around us, because when we have more leaders that believe in change or in a fair society, I think we can do more. So definitely I'm the future. I haven't decided on what capacity in Zim, but we can't stop.
I have my suspicions. After talking to you for an hour, I can see you somewhere else, but I'm not going to pronounce it right now. I mean, one thing that you know we love on this show is books. And you are an author yourself. You're currently working on a short story anthology called The Turquoise Dreams. How is that project going?
It's amazing. We actually published. I'm officially a published author.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so the book is out. Thank you so much.
Good.
It came at the right time. I think it's because I've always been writing. There's a book that I started writing in November 2017 when all that drama happened in our country. But I think over the years, because it's got emotional moments, it's always so difficult to get past certain chapters. So I've never really pushed myself enough to publish. So when this project came and someone said, I want to compile stories by Zimbabwean women of the experiences of Zimbabwean women, I was like, okay, I need to commit to this. So I wrote 3 books in that book, and it was published. So it's, exciting.
What's the book called? What's the book called?
Turquoise Streams.
That's your book. Okay, yes. Turquoise Streams.
Oh, you mean the book that I was writing?
Yeah.
Craziest thing, the title is Dear Mr. President.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay. So I'm working on finishing it. Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what books have you read, Mantate, that you would recommend to our book-loving audience?
So there's one particular book that I always tell everyone about that shaped the way I look at wealth creation. Because, like I mentioned, I'm very high on making money. Because when you have money, you do more. There's a book called The Joseph of Arimathea Calling by Dr.
Ah,
Francis Miles. That book came to me as a Christian to say, for the longest time, we're told that money is the root of evil. People take out the love of in that conversation to say money in itself as a Christian is almost a bad thing. It's almost ungodly to want more money. So when I read that book and it talks about the example of Joseph, the guy who took down Jesus' body from the cross and buried him and paid for everything literally. So it talks about how this guy was not born again. He wasn't a child of God in the sense of the other disciples, but he offered his resources to do something for God. So it talks about the need for us to channel resources that are not from a Christian space into advancing the kingdom of God. So the one thing that it mentions is that as Christians, we need to influence the marketplaces. You can't complain about the pricing of things, that it's ungodly, blah, 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 or there's corruption in the way people do business. If you're not in those spaces, you can't influence. So it talks about the need for us to access resources and then channel them back into advancing how I see myself doing that is I don't own so much now, but the projects that I do, the small projects that I do, where I'm paying school fees for girls, I'm doing this for young women. This is my way of advancing a good cause. So that's what happens when you have money. So that's the first book that I really recommend for anyone interested in business and wealth creation to check out. Then the second book is by Spencer Johnson called Who Moved My Cheese.
aha,
Um,
right.
it's an amazing book. Like I'm always referring to it because it talks about people that have made it. You know, getting to a place where you have found like this is my high of success. So it talks about the tendency of people to want to stay here. Like you want to control and stay with that kind of wealth, but wealth doesn't stay. When you're spending, you're reducing it. So it talks about the need for people to be aware of the change that's happening around their success. It might be reducing, there might be opportunities for more. So being able to open up to that. So that book talks about different characters. And one of the things that someone says about it is that we all have elements of one character. At some point, we are open to change. At some point, we recognize change, but don't do anything about it. At some point, we step out and we do it. So you need to consistently ask yourself, if I want to get out of here, or if I want to stay in a place of high, how do I do that? And the last book that I definitely recommend, especially for people that are working in the civil society space, is it's called There Is No Failure in Peacework. And it talks about the story of this young woman called Baka. So it's ideally centered around conflict resolution and peace building. One of the things I'm very passionate about, the reason why potentially I'm even pursuing psychology is because I want to understand how people move away from trauma. You know, when you look at trauma in the sense of the genocide in Rwanda, you know, trauma in the sense of, you know, the young women in Nigeria that were kidnapped from school, literally have no future unless something happens. If you look at Kukuraundi in Zimbabwe, if you look at the rape experience that I spoke about. So it talks about a young woman who was very passionate about building peace, building communities, including those perpetrators, including the victims, and being able to secure justice for people. So it's something that I'm enjoying. I read it a lot because it kind of motivates me to not just, you know, continue hoping that Zimbabwe will one day not have a lot of this tribal connotation that hangs over our heads, but looking at Africa as a continent to say, how do we build solidarity in our different communities? So those are the three books that are really high in my list.
Wow, very impressive book recommendation there. Mantate Mlotshwa, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you. You know, I love this show because it exposes me to amazing people in Zimbabwe. You are an amazing person.
Thank you.
You know, listening to your story has been so inspirational for me, and I'm sure it's going to be very inspirational to a lot of people. I get the suspicion very strongly that I'm talking to a future leader for this country and perhaps the first woman president for Zimbabwe. You are absolutely exciting, very inspirational, very talented. I like your go up and do something attitude, get up and do something attitude. So I wish you all the very best, Mantate. Allow me now to 10 to our viewers who are in Zimbabwe, who are on the continent and all over the world who watch this show every week. We premiere at 7 a.m. on Mondays. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of this quality conversation, I invite you to subscribe by clicking onto this red button here, and you get an alert every time we have one of these quality conversations. Until next time, cheers to you all.